The crystal chandeliers of the charity gala glittered like frozen fireworks, casting soft halos of light over polished marble and mirrored walls. The air smelled faintly of white roses and expensive perfume, a carefully curated elegance that whispered wealth without ever raising its voice. Amara stepped inside with measured calm, her heels clicking softly against the floor. She wore a simple black dress, no dramatic neckline, no glittering stones, tailored perfectly but free of labels that begged to be noticed. It was the kind of dress chosen by someone who didn't need permission to belong. She paused near the entrance, letting her eyes adjust, letting the noise wash over her. Laughter chimed like glass. Men in tailored tuxedos spoke about markets and mergers, women compared charity trips and summer homes. Amara moved forward, accepting a flute of champagne from a passing server with a quiet thank you. She had learned long ago that confidence did not announce itself, it settled in, unbothered. Still, she felt it. The glances. The quick double takes that lingered half a second too long. The subtle recalculation when people saw her skin, her hair pulled back neatly, her lack of visible wealth. She had worn rooms like this before, in cities across the world, and the pattern was always the same. Some people believed money erased prejudice. It didn't. It only dressed it better. Across the room, Celeste Hawthorne stood at the center of attention like a bright flame. The billionaire's daughter was everything the magazines adored, tall, blonde, laughing too loudly, diamonds dancing at her ears. People leaned in when she spoke, hungry for proximity. Celeste had grown up in rooms like this, she moved through them with casual ownership, as if every chandelier owed her rent. Her eyes landed on Amara, and something flickered, confusion first, then amusement. Celeste leaned toward her friends, her voice carefully pitched to Carrie. Honestly, she said with a light laugh, security is getting so relaxed these days. Anyone can just wander in. Her friends chuckled, following her gaze. Amara heard it. Of course she did. The words brushed past her like cold air, meant to sting, meant to remind. She kept her posture relaxed, fingers steady around her glass. Years ago, a comment like that might have tightened her chest, might have stirred old memories of being underestimated, unseen. But time had taught her restraint, the kind that came from knowing exactly who you were. Celeste took a step closer, smile sharp as cut crystal. Are you looking for someone? She asked, eyes flicking briefly to Amara's dress. The staff entrance is usually around the back. The nearby laughter softened into an expectant hush. A small audience had gathered, the way it always did when power decided to perform. Amara met Celeste's gaze. Her eyes were warm, steady. Thank you, she said calmly. I'm exactly where I need to be. The response seemed to irritate Celeste more than anger ever could. She raised an eyebrow. Well, she said lightly, this is a private event. Invitation only. It would be awkward if someone embarrassed themselves. There it was, the humiliation, wrapped neatly in concern. A few guests shifted uncomfortably. Others smiled into their drinks, relieved they weren't the target. Amara took a slow sip of champagne. She felt the familiar ache of memory rise uninvited, her mother balancing two jobs, landlords who raised rent without notice, doors that closed before she even reached them. She remembered promising herself, standing in a cramped apartment years ago, that if she ever held power, she would hold it differently. She lowered her glass and offered a polite smile. I appreciate your concern, she said. Enjoy your evening. Then she stepped aside, not in retreat, but with grace. The moment, denied its climax, fizzled. Celeste scoffed softly and turned away, already bored, already convinced she had won. Amara moved through the room, the noise gradually swallowing the tension. She exchanged quiet greetings with a few familiar faces, an architect she'd worked with in Nairobi, a nonprofit director from Chicago. They smiled warmly, spoke in low tones. Their recognition was subtle, respectful. That, too, was power, the kind that didn't need witnesses. As she stood near a column overlooking the dance floor, Amara watched the room the way a chess player watches a board. She saw alliances forming, favors being traded in laughter and promises. She saw generosity used as branding. And she saw Celeste again, surrounded by admirers, reenacting the moment with exaggerated humor, mimicking Amara's calm voice for laughs. Amara felt no anger. Only clarity. The host tapped the microphone, and the music softened. Conversation slowed to murmurs. Amara straightened slightly, already sensing the shift. She had not planned for attention tonight, she never did. But truth had a way of arriving on its own schedule. "Ladies and gentlemen," the host began, smiling broadly, "thank you for being part of this evening dedicated to rebuilding communities and creating opportunity. Before we continue, we'd like to acknowledge someone very special, someone who prefers to stay out of the spotlight, but without whom tonight wouldn't be possible." Amara felt the room tilt. "This venue," the host continued, gesturing around, "was generously provided at no cost. In fact, the owner has quietly supported housing initiatives, small businesses, and shelters across the city for years. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Amara Collins." For a heartbeat, there was only silence. Then heads turned. Whispers bloomed like sparks. Amara set her glass down and stepped forward, her heels echoing more loudly now. Applause followed, hesitant at first, then swelling as recognition dawned. Faces rearranged themselves into surprise, admiration, disbelief. Celeste froze. The color drained from her smile as she watched Amara walk to the front, composed, unhurried. The realization landed hard in public, like a dropped glass shattering on marble. The floor beneath her feet, the walls she leaned against, the room she believed she owned, none of it was hers. Amara took the microphone, her hands steady. She glanced across the crowd once, her eyes passing briefly over Celeste, not with triumph, not with accusation, but with quiet certainty. "Good evening," Amara said, her voice warm, clear. "Thank you for being here. I believe generosity is most powerful when it's shared without conditions. Buildings are easy to own. Responsibility is harder." The room listened now. Truly listened. Amara smiled gently. "Tonight isn't about me," she continued. "It's about what we choose to build, and who we choose to lift along the way." And somewhere in the crowd, Celeste Hawthorne finally understood that the woman she had tried to shrink had never been small at all. The applause lingered longer than etiquette required, swelling into something warmer, heavier. Amara stepped back from the microphone as the host thanked her again, and the band softly resumed, but the room had changed. Conversations restarted in a different key. Where there had been careless laughter before, there was now caution, curiosity edged with respect. People recalibrated, adjusting their smiles, their posture, their sense of who mattered. Celeste Hawthorne stood rigid, her glass untouched in her hand. Around her, the circle that once felt effortless tightened uncomfortably. A few guests glanced at her, then away. Others pretended not to notice her at all. For the first time that evening, Celeste felt exposed, not because someone had insulted her, but because someone had revealed the truth without saying her name. Amara moved through the room again, but this time the path opened naturally. A city council member approached her, praising her housing initiatives. A developer spoke eagerly about a sustainable project, suddenly humble. Amara listened more than she spoke, asking questions that cut to substance, not spectacle. She had learned long ago that power multiplied when it invited others to grow. Celeste watched from a distance, heat creeping up her neck. She replayed the earlier moment again and again, her voice, the laughter, the way she'd assumed. No amount of money had prepared her for this feeling, being wrong in front of everyone, and knowing it. Finally, she straightened her shoulders and walked toward Amara. The crowd subtly parted, sensing gravity. Celeste stopped a few feet away. For a moment, neither woman spoke. The music hummed softly behind them. "I owe you an apology," Celeste said at last, her voice lower than usual. Stripped of its sharpness, it sounded younger. "What I said earlier was inappropriate. I didn't know." Amara studied her face, not to judge, but to understand. She saw pride struggling with humility, entitlement wrestling accountability. "You didn't know who I was," Amara said gently. "That's true." Celeste swallowed. "I didn't know anything," she admitted. "And I assumed." "Yes," Amara said. "You did." The word landed without cruelty. "It didn't need any." Celeste exhaled, nodding. "I'm sorry," she said again, more firmly this time. "There's no excuse." Amara considered her for a moment longer, then inclined her head. "Apologies matter," she said. "But what follows them matters more." Celeste looked up, surprised. "What do you mean?" Amara gestured toward the room, the donors, the deals, the glitter. "Influence is a tool," she said. "You can use it to elevate yourself. Or you can use it to elevate others. One leaves a legacy. The other leaves an echo." Celeste felt the weight of that truth press against her chest. She nodded slowly. If there's anything I can do, she said, cautious but sincere, I'd like to help. Amara smiled, not broadly, but honestly. Then start by listening, she said. And by understanding that respect shouldn't depend on introductions. Celeste flushed, but she nodded. I will. The rest of the evening unfolded differently for both of them. Amara spent time with organizers, discussing plans for affordable housing near transit lines, for rent caps that protected small businesses, for partnerships that didn't extract more than they gave. She spoke about her childhood, not as a sob story, but as context. About watching her mother negotiate rent hikes that came without warning. About understanding that stability wasn't charity, it was infrastructure. People listened. Some took notes. Celeste, meanwhile, found herself quieter than usual. She stayed near the edges, observing. For the first time, she noticed who refilled glasses, who stood without chairs, who was thanked and who was ignored. She heard conversations she'd once dismissed. The room hadn't changed, her eyes had. When the gala began to wind down, coats appearing and drivers being summoned, Amara stepped outside onto the terrace. The city stretched below, lights flickering like constellations made by human hands. The night air was cool, grounding. Celeste joined her a moment later. I didn't grow up thinking about landlords, Celeste said suddenly, staring out at the skyline. Or rent. Or any of it. Things were just there. Amara nodded. That's often the case, she said. Invisibility is comfortable for the people it protects. Celeste gave a small, rueful smile. I don't want to be that person anymore. Amara glanced at her. Wanting is a start, she said. Doing is the work. They stood in silence for a while, the city humming below them. In the weeks that followed, the story traveled, not as gossip, but as lesson. It showed up in boardrooms and brunches, framed differently depending on who told it. Some called it poetic justice. Others called it a wake-up call. Amara didn't comment. She returned to her work, to meetings and site visits and late-night spreadsheets, where real change was quieter and harder. Celeste did something unexpected. She asked to meet. Not for photos. Not for press. Just to learn. They sat across from each other in a modest conference room weeks later, sunlight streaming through unadorned windows. Amara laid out numbers, policies, stories. Celeste asked questions, awkward ones at first, then sharper, more informed. She listened. She took notes. Months passed. Rent stabilization proposals gained traction. A new scholarship fund launched, matched dollar for dollar, just as Amara had suggested. Small businesses stayed open. Families stayed housed. The changes weren't miracles, but they were measurable. One afternoon, Celeste stood at the opening of a community center funded quietly, without her name on the wall. She watched children run across freshly painted floors, laughter echoing. For the first time, pride felt different, lighter, earned. Amara arrived late, unnoticed at first. She watched Celeste kneel to speak to a little girl, listening carefully, seriously. When their eyes met across the room, Celeste smiled, not the sharp, performative smile of the gala, but something softer. Amara nodded once. The world didn't transform overnight. Prejudice didn't evaporate. Power didn't suddenly become fair. But something shifted that night at the gala, a small, important thing. A room learned that dignity doesn't need an invitation. And a woman who owned the ground beneath their feet showed them how to stand on it.